The last customer left at 2:30, and I didn't even try to smile as I turned the sign from open to closed. I stood there for a moment, with my hand still on the door, looking out at the gray November sky over Millbrook, Vermont. The maple trees along the street had already given up their leaves. Everything looked stripped down and tired, and I understood exactly how they felt. My name is Nora, and for 3 years I had run the Thread and Needle, a small alterations and custom sewing shop on the corner of Elm and 2nd. I had opened it 2 months after my 28th birthday with $11,000 I'd saved, working double shifts at a department store, a used industrial sewing machine, and the absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. My grandmother had taught me to sew when I was 7 years old. Sitting beside her, at her old singer in the back bedroom of her house in Burlington, she always said that a well-made seam was a kind of promise that you were telling someone their clothes, and by extension they themselves, were worth the extra care. I had believed that. For a long time, I had really believed that. But belief doesn't pay a landlord. I walked back to the counter and opened the ledger I kept by hand, the way my grandmother would have. The numbers looked back at me the same way they had every evening for the past 4 months, honest and unforgiving. October had been the worst month yet. I had covered rent, barely, and bought enough thread and interfacing and lining fabric to keep working, but the account that was supposed to be my cushion, the small buffer I had built up in the first year, was completely gone. I had already decided, quietly, the week before, I would finish out the month, complete the orders I had taken on, and then I would write the letter to my landlord. I would pack the dress forms and the notions and the bolts of fabric I couldn't bear to sell, and I would figure out what came next. There were other jobs. There were always other jobs. That was what I kept telling myself when I woke up at 3 in the morning and stared at the ceiling. I pulled the current order bag from the hook behind the counter. Inside was a pair of trousers needing a hem, a bridesmaid dress with a broken zipper, and a winter coat requiring new buttons. 3 jobs, maybe $40 of work altogether. I set them on the cutting table and stood looking at them without moving. The bell above the door rang. I turned around, already forming the words, "I'm sorry, we're closed," and stopped. A woman stood in the doorway. She was somewhere in her late 60s, small and upright, wearing a navy wool coat that had been well cared for and a cream-colored scarf. Her white hair was pinned up neatly. In her arms she was holding a garment bag, the long kind used for formal wear. And she was holding it the way people hold things that matter to them carefully, slightly away from her body, as though protecting it from harm. Her face, when she looked at me, was distressed in a way that wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet distress of someone who has been holding it together for a long time and is not entirely sure how much longer they can manage. "Are you the seamstress?" she asked. Her voice was steady but thin. "I am," I said, "but we're actually closed for the day. I'm sorry. If you want to come back tomorrow morning, please," she said it simply, without performance. "I only need 5 minutes. If you can't help me, I'll go. I didn't know where else to come." I looked at her. I looked at the garment bag. I thought about the ledger on the counter behind me. "Come in," I said. She stepped inside and I turned the lock behind her, out of habit more than anything. She laid the garment bag on the cutting table with the kind of care that told me everything before she even unzipped it. When she did, I saw a wedding gown. It was ivory silk, not new, probably 30 or 35 years old. From the look of the construction, with a fitted bodice, long sleeves, and a full skirt that had been preserved well, but not perfectly. It was the kind of dress that had been worn once, loved completely, and then folded away with the hope that it might someday be worn again. "My daughter is getting married on Saturday," the woman said. "That's 4 days from now. This was my wedding dress. We had it altered at a shop in Burlington 8 weeks ago, took it in at the waist, let it out slightly at the shoulders, shortened the hem." She paused. "I went to pick it up yesterday. The shop had closed. Permanently. The owner didn't tell anyone. Just locked the door." I moved closer and looked at the dress without touching it yet. The alterations are inside, she said. Still basted. Meaning none of it is actually finished. The hem isn't sewn. The bodice seams aren't properly closed. The zipper on the left side, her voice caught, just slightly, just for a second. The zipper has been replaced, but only half installed. I reached out then and carefully turned back the skirt to look at the hem. She was right. The other shop had done the measuring and the pinning and some of the preliminary work, but the actual finishing the work that made it a dress rather than a carefully organized intention had not been done. Your daughter doesn't know? I asked. I didn't want to worry her. She's already. The woman paused. She's already been through a great deal this year. She lost her father in March. My husband, he had been ill for some time, but still. She said it with the practiced economy of someone who has explained grief so many times they've learned to compress it. The wedding was planned before he passed. She thought about postponing it, but we talked, and we decided he would have wanted her to go on. He would have been the first one to say so. I looked at the dress. I looked at the woman. What's your name? I asked. Margaret, she said. Margaret Hollis. I'm Nora. I set my hand gently on the skirt of the dress. Margaret, I'm going to be honest with you about what I'm seeing, and then I'm going to tell you what I think is possible. She nodded. The basting is actually fairly well done. Whoever started this knew what they were doing. They just didn't finish it. The hem is the biggest job. Ivory silk on a skirt this full, hand-finished properly, is going to take me most of tonight. The zipper I can complete, that's maybe 2 hours. The bodice seams I'll close and press, another hour and a half. 2 hours. I looked up at her. I can have this dress ready by Thursday afternoon. That gives you a full day before the wedding. Margaret Hollis looked at me. Her eyes were steady and gray. Can you actually do it? She said. Not, I don't mean to be rude. I mean truly. Can it be done properly in that time? I had not said yes yet to anything, and she already knew that I was the kind of person whose yes meant something. I appreciated that. Yes, I said. I can do it properly. She closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. When she opened them again, she reached into her coat pocket and took out her wallet. Whatever you need, she said. Whatever it costs. We'll talk about that Thursday, I said. Let me write down your number, and I'll call you if anything comes up, but I don't expect anything to come up. She wrote her number on the notepad I kept by the register, and then she looked once more at the dress, still spread open on the cutting table. Her name is Claire, she said. My daughter. She looks just like I did, which is why the dress suits her. My husband always said she stopped. He always said she had my stubbornness and his sense of humor, and that between the two she'd be fine. A small, real smile crossed her face. He was right. After she left, I stood alone in the shop for a moment in the quiet. Then, I put the kettle on, turned on every lamp, and went to work. I worked until 11:30 that night and picked it up again at 6 the next morning. I won't pretend it wasn't hard. Ivory silk is unforgiving. It shows every imprecision, every needle hole in the wrong place, every press mark if your iron is a single degree too hot. The hem alone required cutting and folding the underlinings separately from the fashion fabric, slip-stitching each in its own time, and then pressing with a pressing cloth and a wooden clapper to get the edge flat without leaving a mark. My grandmother had taught me that too. She'd said you couldn't rush a hem any more than you could rush bread rising, and that people who tried always regretted it. I thought about her a lot those 2 days. I also thought, if I'm honest, about the fact that this was probably one of the last jobs I'd do in this shop. There's a particular feeling that comes with knowing an ending is near. It makes you both more tired and more careful. I was tired down to my bones, but my stitches were the best I had ever made. The zipper was the nerve-wracking part. The previous shop had cut the original zipper out cleanly, which was professional, but they'd only pinned the new one, an ivory-toned invisible zipper, and begun the first few inches of machine stitching before stopping. Finishing an invisible zipper in a silk gown requires coaxing the zipper teeth back with a warm iron before sewing, so that the pull ends up truly invisible. If you stitch it cold, The teeth don't press flat, and you can see the line under the fabric. I heated my iron, held my breath, and worked slowly. It disappeared completely into the seam. I pressed the bodice, re-secured the lining at the back, and added 2 small weight beads inside the hem on either side of the center front to help the skirt fall correctly. My grandmother had shown me that trick, too. She said the secret of beautiful clothes was that most of the work was invisible. It was all the things people never saw that made them feel wonderful when they wore it. By Wednesday evening, the dress was finished. I pressed it one final time, steamed the skirt carefully on the form, and then hung it in the shop's longest garment bag, the one I kept for formal work. I called Margaret at 7 Wednesday night. "It's ready," I told her. "It's ready, and it's right." There was a silence on her end, and then she said, "Thank you, Nora," with such plain, unadorned sincerity that I had to look away from what I was doing for a moment to collect myself. She came Thursday morning. She unzipped the bag in the middle of the shop and stood looking at the dress for a long time without saying anything. Then she turned back to me. "May I try the zipper?" she asked. Of course. She reached around and zipped it herself, slowly, from the bottom to the top. It ran without resistance, silent and smooth. "Oh," she said softly. I told her the price. She said it was not enough, and added a third to it, in cash, without discussion. Before she left, she asked me for a card. "In case anyone asks," she said. "And they will ask. I know the women in that family, and they will absolutely ask." I gave her a card. I had a box of them, 3 years old, gathering dust on the shelf below the counter. As I handed it to her, I thought, with the dull clarity of exhaustion, that it probably wouldn't matter either way. I was most likely going to be gone in 2 weeks. She left. The shop was quiet. I made coffee and sat at the cutting table and allowed myself to feel, for a few minutes, what I had been holding off feeling. It was a complicated thing. Satisfaction, real satisfaction at the work, and underneath it, persistent and low, the grief of knowing I was losing the place where I got to do that work. I went home, slept for 9 hours, and came back Friday morning feeling human again for the first time all week. There was a woman waiting outside the shop door. She was in her early 30s, dark-haired, wearing a wedding ring and a wool coat, and when I unlocked the door, she said, "Are you Nora? Did you fix Margaret Hollis's dress?" I said yes. She held up a green bridesmaid dress over her arm. "The hem is coming out and the left shoulder seam is splitting, and Claire's wedding is tomorrow, and I am genuinely begging you." I looked at the dress. It was a simple fix, an hour, maybe an hour and a half. "Come in," I said. By afternoon, I had taken in 2 more jobs that came through the door without any announcement from me. One was a tuxedo jacket with a pulled lining. One was a flower girl dress that needed the sash reattached and the hem shortened by 2 inches. I was running behind on the tuxedo when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Susan who said her friend Margaret had given her my card and that she needed a blouse repaired before a work event on Monday. Then, while I was still on the phone with Susan, another call came in from a number I didn't know. I let it go to voicemail. By the time I closed that evening, I had 4 messages. I sat at the cutting table again, in the same chair where I'd sat the evening before feeling the shape of an ending, and I looked at the order bag, which was fuller than it had been in 6 months. I looked at the notepad where I'd written down the names and numbers and the work they needed. I sat there for a long time, not quite trusting what I was seeing. Saturday, I opened the shop for the first time on a weekend in over a year. I told myself it was just to catch up. 3 more people came in. One of them asked if I did custom work, not just alterations. A mother of a teenage girl wanted a prom dress made from scratch. She had brought a photograph torn from a magazine and her daughter's measurements written on a folded piece of paper, and she looked at me the way Margaret had looked at me the first night, with the particular hope of someone who has been let down by other people and is trying again anyway. "Yes," I said, "I do custom work." That's actually I stopped. I looked at the photograph. I thought about the pattern pieces I would draft. the way the fabric would need to be cut on the bias to get the drape in the skirt. I felt something move in my chest that had been still for a very long time. That's actually what I love most. On Monday morning, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved. It said, "This is Claire, Margaret Hollis's daughter. I just wanted you to know the dress was perfect. I'm not sure if you understand what that meant to us. My father would have loved seeing it. Thank you, truly." I read it twice. Then a third time. I thought about my grandmother at her singer, the sound of it. The way she would hold up a finished seam to the light to check it. She used to say that sewing was one of the few things where you could make something that lasted. That a coat or a dress, made with real care, could outlive you. That the work was a kind of conversation across time. I had not thought about that in a while. I had been too busy being afraid. That afternoon I called my landlord and told him I was not, in fact, leaving. He sounded surprised. I had given him no warning that I was planning to go, and now I was giving him no warning that I was planning to stay. And I think he found me somewhat baffling as a tenant. That was all right with me. In the weeks that followed, the work kept coming. Not a flood, I want to be honest about that, because things that really happen are almost never floods. It came the way good things usually come, steadily and in pieces, one person telling another, one card passed along at a dinner table or over coffee. A retired schoolteacher brought me her late mother's quilts to be repaired. A young woman came in with her grandmother's coat, nearly 80 years old, which needed new buttons and a replaced interlining, and she cried a little when I told her it could be saved. I didn't mind. I understood. I hired someone to help me, a woman named Diana, who had studied fashion design and was working at a grocery store and had heard through a mutual acquaintance that I might need an extra pair of hands. She was very good and she knew how to press a seam correctly, which I considered a non-negotiable personality trait. We got along well. There was a morning in January, a cold Tuesday with snow coming down outside the window on Elm Street, when I was at the machine working on a jacket lining, and Diana was at the table cutting pattern pieces, and the shop was warm and smelled of fabric sizing and coffee from the pot on the shelf, and I looked up and thought about the night I had worked on Margaret Hollis's dress. The quiet of it, the lamps, the way the silk had felt under my hands when it finally lay right. I had been so close to letting all of this go. I don't think I was wrong to be scared. The fear was real, and the numbers were real, and the loneliness of running something on your own, of pouring yourself into work that not enough people seem to value, that's real too. I don't want to tell a story where being afraid was the mistake. Sometimes being afraid is just what it is. But I think, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, I think what Margaret Hollis gave me that evening when she walked in with her daughter's wedding gown was not a rescue. She didn't save me. What she gave me was a reason to keep going for a few more days. That's all. Just a few more days, and a piece of work worth doing carefully. And it turned out that was enough. Sometimes it really is just that small a door that stays open one extra evening, a decision to say come in instead of we're closed, and then whatever comes from that, which you couldn't have predicted and can't control and probably shouldn't try to. My grandmother used to say, you couldn't see a finished seam until you turned the fabric right side out. All that work, hidden inside, all those tiny stitches, invisible, and then you turn it, and it's whole. I think about that now, in the shop on Tuesday mornings. I think about all the things you can't see until you get to the other side of them. I think it would have been a shame to close the door before I found out.